I am Alice, and I'm 28 years old. If you were to meet me today, you might see a calm woman who carries herself with quiet confidence, someone who doesn't seem easily shaken by people's opinions. But it wasn't always like that. For a long time, I was the girl who stood silently in the corner while my own family laughed at me. I was the one they whispered about, dismissed, and mocked behind my back. I learned early that sometimes the people you expect to stand by you can be the ones who push you away the hardest. I grew up in a well-off family in North Carolina. My father, Thomas, came from old money, the kind that buys respect in small-town society. He owned part of a construction company that had been in our family for 2 generations. My mother, on the other hand, came from modest roots, but she had learned how to blend in with the social circle my father moved in. They had 3 children, my brother Michael, my sister Carolyn, and then me, the youngest. From the outside, we looked perfect. But families like ours often hide things behind appearances, don't they? My siblings were always closer to each other. They were the golden children, smart, loud, and socially popular. I was quiet. I liked to read, draw, and spend time with my grandmother, who was the only one in the family who ever made me feel seen. My grandmother, Eleanor, had a saying, "Quiet water cuts the deepest rock." I didn't understand it then, but those words would become my truth years later. My childhood wasn't terrible, but it was lonely. I often found myself at family gatherings sitting at the end of the table, listening rather than speaking. I'd laugh when others laughed, but no one ever asked me what I thought. As I grew older, that distance only widened. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned to expect that I was not really part of the inner circle of my own family. Caroline, my sister, was the star of every family event. She was beautiful, confident, and ambitious, everything people admired in a young woman. My brother Michael was clever and bold, the kind of man who could charm anyone in the room. They had friends, attention, and all the approval I secretly wished for. When I went to college on a scholarship, I remember my aunt whispering to my cousin, "Oh, that's sweet. She finally did something good." It hurt, but I swallowed it. That's what I did back then. I swallowed pain and turned it into silence. After college, I moved away to work in real estate. It wasn't glamorous at first, but I worked hard. I was the type who stayed late, did research others ignored, and treated every client with patience. My first few years were slow, but I learned the business, the value of property, the psychology of buyers, and the politics of negotiation. What my family didn't know, or care to ask, was that I had found my strength in that work. I began saving every bit of commission I earned. I didn't buy fancy things or post pictures to prove success. I just worked quietly, learning, growing, and investing in small things. Meanwhile, my family was busy keeping up appearances. My father's company was struggling, though he never admitted it openly. My brother took over most of the operations, but lacked discipline. Caroline, who had married a lawyer, enjoyed her social life, often hosting events at the local country club, the same place where, years later, my revenge would begin to unfold. That country club was more than just a social venue. For my family, it was a symbol of status of belonging. I wasn't a member, of course, not officially. I was invited to some family events, but I always felt out of place there. I could feel the glances, the polite smiles that turned sharp the moment I looked away. My cousins made jokes about my simple job. My aunts often compared me with Caroline. One time, during a Christmas dinner, Caroline laughed and said, "Alice, maybe you should date one of the maintenance guys here. At least you'd get free membership." Everyone laughed. My father didn't say a word. My mother smiled awkwardly. I just excused myself and went outside to breathe. That night, I cried in my car, promising myself that one day, I wouldn't have to sit through moments like that again. It wasn't about revenge then. It was about survival. Over the next few years, things changed. Real estate in my city began to boom. I had made a few smart investments early on, small properties in developing areas that everyone else ignored. By the time those areas became valuable, I was already sitting on assets worth far more than I'd imagined. But I didn't tell anyone. I stayed quiet. I kept working. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon when my grandmother's lawyer contacted me. He told me that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep. My heart sank. She had been the only person in the family who truly loved me without conditions. I drove back to the family home for the funeral. Everyone was there, dressed in black, saying the right words, acting somber for show. After the service, we gathered for the reading of her will. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, she had left almost everything to me. Her house, her savings, even her shares in a few businesses, including a small ownership in the local country club. Caroline's face went pale when she heard it. My brother's jaw tightened. My father didn't speak for a long time. I remember my aunt whispering, "She must have manipulated her." But I hadn't. I never asked my grandmother for a thing. She left me what she wanted because she saw what others didn't, that I had worked hard, quietly, and alone. The weeks that followed were tense. My father and siblings barely spoke to me. Family dinners became cold and brief, but I focused on managing what I had inherited. I met with financial advisors, learned more about business structures, and eventually started investing in hospitality properties. And then, one day while reviewing possible acquisitions, a familiar name appeared on my desk. The same country club where my family spent their weekends. It was struggling financially, weighed down by mismanagement and debt. The owners were considering selling part or all of their shares. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at that document, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and destiny. I didn't rush. I spent weeks studying the numbers, the property value, and the market potential. And then, quietly, I made an offer through an investment group I controlled. No one knew my name was behind it. A few months later, the deal went through. I had become the majority owner of the very club where my family once made me feel small. But I didn't tell them. Not yet. For months, I let things run normally. I met with the staff, improved working conditions, renovated areas that needed care, and restructured the management. The place began to thrive again. Then, out of nowhere, I got a group message from Caroline. She had organized a small family gathering at the country club. It was meant to celebrate our father's birthday. Everyone was invited, including me. Her message had that tone she always used with me, polite but layered with subtle condescension. "You're welcome to come if you can make it," she wrote, as if it were a favor. I smiled at my phone for a long time. For years I had imagined being in that place again, but this time I wouldn't be standing in the corner. I RSVP'd with a simple, "I'll be there." That night, I took my time choosing what to wear, something simple, elegant, and comfortable. I didn't want to show off. I just wanted to walk in as myself, fully, for the first time. The morning of the event, I arrived a little early. The staff smiled when they saw me. They knew who I was now. One of them asked quietly, "Would you like us to prepare anything special for your table, ma'am?" I said, "No, just let things happen as they usually do." And then, as I stood near the entrance, watching my family arrive, laughing and greeting one another, I felt calm. Truly calm. They didn't notice me at first. Caroline walked in wearing a bright red dress, followed by Michael and his wife. My father arrived last, holding my mother's arm. They all went to the VIP area like they always did, the same section where I had once been told I didn't belong. A few minutes later, I walked in. The room went quiet for a moment. My cousin Laura looked me up and down, smirked, and whispered something to Caroline. Then, with that same superiority she always carried, Caroline walked up to me, her voice sharp but sweet. "You can't afford this place, Alice," she said. "We're in the VIP area." I didn't respond. I just walked past her, calm and steady, toward the table where they were all sitting. That's when she snapped her fingers at the security guard and said loudly, "Get her out, she's making a scene." But before he could move, the guard looked straight at her and said, in a firm voice that carried across the room, "Ma'am, she's the new owner of this place." The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, the entire room froze. You could have heard the sound of a single breath in that space. My cousin's mouth fell open, and Caroline blinked twice, as if the guard had just spoken another language. My father's fork clinked softly against his glass, the only sound that broke the heavy silence. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Caroline's face went red, then pale, then red again, cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked a lot like humiliation. My aunt, sitting at the table, whispered something under her breath, but no one responded. The guard looked between us awkwardly, realizing he had said something that carried more weight than he expected. But I gave him a small nod, letting him know it was okay. He stepped back, leaving the scene as it was. I turned my gaze toward my sister. "I'm not making a scene, Caroline," I said softly. "You asked for security, and he just did his job." Her lips parted like she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. I pulled out a chair at the table, the same table where I had never been allowed to sit before, the same one where years of my life had been marked by invisible walls, by whispered reminders of who I supposedly was and where I didn't belong. As I sat down, I caught my father's eyes. He was staring at me, stunned, trying to read my expression. My mother shifted uncomfortably beside him, looking between us like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. I smiled calmly, folded my napkin, and said, "Please, don't stop eating because of me." It wasn't said in sarcasm. It was just calm, a kind of calm that came from knowing I didn't have to fight anymore. The waiter came by a few seconds later and asked if I'd like to order. Caroline muttered something about the nerve, but the waiter looked at me respectfully and said, "Of course, Ms. Bennett, your usual drink." I nodded. That simple exchange seemed to tighten the air even more. It was surreal. The same place where I had once been treated like an outsider now addressed me as its highest authority. My brother, Michael, finally spoke. "You're joking," he said. "You're not really the owner." I looked at him. "I am." "Bought the place last year." He frowned. "How?" "You work in real estate, not—" "I own a real estate investment group," I said, still calm. "This property came under review. It wasn't doing well financially, so I made an offer. It made sense." He leaned back in his chair, processing the information. He wasn't used to being out of control in a conversation. Caroline looked at him for support, but even he didn't know what to say. The truth is, I wasn't there to gloat. I wasn't there to make anyone feel small. I was there because, for once, I wanted to show them, not through words, but through presence, that they had misjudged me all my life. That quiet doesn't mean weak, that kindness doesn't mean naive. Still, I could feel the tremor in my chest, not of fear, but of long suppressed emotion finally exhaling. Years of being talked down to, dismissed or excluded, now existed in this single moment of quiet dignity. Caroline tried to recover her composure. "Well," she said, picking up her fork, "I guess congratulations are in order. I didn't realize we had a businesswoman in the family." Her voice was light, but the bitterness underneath it was sharp enough to taste. "Thank you," I said simply. My father finally spoke. "Alice," he began, his tone careful, "why didn't you tell us about this?" I looked at him. "Because I didn't think you'd care, Dad. You never asked about my work before." That landed heavily. My father's eyes softened for a moment, maybe guilt, maybe reflection. My mother sighed quietly. Caroline stared at her plate. For the rest of the meal, the conversation was awkward. They tried to shift back into small talk, about local events, the new golf tournament, some gossip about people in town. But the mood had changed. The hierarchy that had once ruled our family dinners was gone. The air had equalized. When dessert came, I stood up and smiled politely. "I'll cover the bill tonight," I said. "It's on the house, after all." That earned a few uneasy chuckles. My brother muttered something like "show off" under his breath. I ignored it. As I walked out, the same guard who had spoken earlier gave me a respectful nod. "Good evening, Ms. Bennett," he said quietly. "Good evening," I replied. smiling. Outside, the air felt cool against my skin. The evening lights shimmered over the parking lot, and I stood there for a while, breathing in that feeling of calm satisfaction. Not triumph. Not vengeance, just peace. But revenge and the real kind. The kind that life slowly crafts for you. Wasn't done yet. In the weeks that followed, word began to spread quietly among our community that I was the new owner of the country club. Some people were surprised, others curious, but most just accepted it. Business-wise, it was one of the best investments I had ever made. The place's finances were improving. Membership requests started increasing. I had introduced better staff benefits and new policies that made the club more welcoming, something the previous owners had neglected. But my family? They didn't know what to do with this new version of me. Caroline started texting me occasionally, small talk about upcoming events, or passive questions like, "Are you planning to renovate the VIP lounge?" I could sense that she was trying to reframe her relationship with me, to adjust to this new reality where she wasn't the superior one anymore. Michael, on the other hand, avoided me. He rarely attended family dinners now. My father stayed mostly neutral, though I could tell he was proud, even if he didn't say it outright. My mother began reaching out more, asking how I was doing, what I was working on. It was strange, but also comforting. Still, deep down, I wasn't satisfied. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted truth. I wanted them to see not just my success, but the pain that had shaped it. The years of exclusion, the mockery, the subtle cruelty. I didn't want to punish them. I wanted them to understand. So I came up with an idea. The country club was hosting its annual Founders Gala, a big event that attracted the town's most influential families. It was always a highlight of the year, with music, awards, and elegant speeches. Traditionally, the owner would make a short address. The previous owners had kept that speech simple, thanking sponsors, praising the community, and so on. But this year, it would be different. I decided I would tell my story. Not with bitterness, not with accusation, but with calm honesty. When the night of the gala arrived, the hall was filled with chandeliers, soft music, and laughter. Everyone was dressed elegantly, sipping champagne, greeting one another with polite smiles. My family was there, of course. Caroline wore another expensive dress. Michael stood near the bar, and my parents sat near the front. When the host introduced me as the new majority owner and managing partner of the club, I saw several heads turn toward my family. The applause that followed was warm, but in my heart, it felt like closure. I walked to the podium, took a slow breath, and began to speak. Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be standing here tonight, not just as the owner of this beautiful club, but as someone who's been part of this community for a long time, often in quiet ways. I paused, scanning the crowd gently. When I was younger, I used to think that belonging was something you had to earn through acceptance, that you had to fit in, dress a certain way, act a certain way, speak softly enough not to offend, but loud enough to be noticed. And for a long time I thought that I hadn't earned that place. People were listening now. The room had grown still. But life has a way of teaching us that value doesn't come from approval. It comes from patience, from work, from how we rise when we're ignored. It comes from the quiet moments when we decide who we are, even if no one else sees it. I didn't look directly at my family, but I could feel their eyes on me. I bought this club because I believe in spaces that make people feel they belong, not because of money, or names or status, but because of respect. Everyone deserves that. A few people clapped softly. When I stepped down from the stage, I felt something lift from me, like a chapter quietly closing. After the speech, several people came up to congratulate me. Even Caroline approached, smiling tightly. That was inspiring, she said. Really good speech. Thank you, I said, smiling. For once, her eyes didn't carry that same superiority. There was a hint of something else. Maybe humility. Maybe reflection. Later that night, as I stood by the window overlooking the garden lights, my father came up beside me. He didn't say much, just stood there for a while before finally whispering, "Your grandmother would be proud." I turned to him and said softly, "I hope so." The revenge had already happened, not through anger, not through shouting, but through quiet success and calm strength. And the truth is, the sweetest revenge is never loud. It's simply living your life in peace while others realize what they lost when they underestimated you. Still, my story with them wasn't over. Life, as it turned out, had more lessons waiting. And one final twist that would test just how much forgiveness I could truly give. After that night, something changed. Not just in how my family saw me, but in how I saw them. For the first time in my life, I stopped craving their approval. It wasn't anger that replaced it. It was something softer. A quiet indifference, like when you finally stop touching a bruise and realize it doesn't hurt anymore. The days after the gala were peaceful. I spent my mornings walking the garden paths of the club, greeting staff, discussing small improvements. Business was steady, the atmosphere brighter. I could sense that the employees felt more valued, and that gave me a kind of fulfillment I'd never known before. But peace, as I've learned, has a way of inviting tests. And my next test came from a direction I didn't expect. My own brother. It started subtly. Michael called one afternoon, his voice unusually polite. "Hey, Alice," he said. "You got a minute?" "Sure," I replied, surprised. "What's up?" "I heard your club's expanding its events calendar," he said. "Corporate retreats, fundraisers, that kind of thing?" "That's right. We're booking more year-round functions." "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I might have a client who'd be interested in hosting an event there. Thought maybe I could help you out. You know, bring in business." It sounded nice on the surface, but I knew my brother well enough to hear the undertone. Michael was a businessman too, charming, ambitious, and always looking for an angle. Still, I said yes. "Sure, send me the details," I told him. A week later, he came to the club with a few associates. I greeted them politely, offered them a tour, and showed them our facilities. He was confident, smiling, acting like he was already part of the management. I didn't mind. I wanted him to feel included. Maybe, I thought, this was a step toward healing old wounds. But as weeks went by, small things began to catch my attention. A few invoices went missing. One of my junior managers mentioned that Michael had been promising special discounts to some of his friends, without authorization. Another staff member said he had asked for access to our vendor list. It wasn't enough to confront him right away, but it was enough to raise suspicion. I decided to wait and watch. In the meantime, I kept focusing on my work, expanding the club's partnerships, building community programs, even setting up charity golf tournaments. Those things mattered to me. They weren't about reputation. They were about meaning. One evening, as I was closing up my office, I got a message from our finance manager. "Urgent. We need to talk tomorrow morning about account discrepancies." I barely slept that night. The next morning, when I arrived, the manager laid out several documents on my desk. Unauthorized transactions, missing payments, and duplicate invoices. The amounts weren't massive, but enough to signal deliberate tampering. The worst part? The payments had gone through a company linked to my brother. My heart sank. I stared at the papers, my mind swimming. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that someone else had used his name. But deep down, I knew the truth. Michael had tried to use my success, my work, for his own gain. It was strange. Even after everything, after the humiliation, the exclusion, the years of silence, I hadn't expected betrayal like this. I called him that afternoon. "Michael," I said, keeping my voice calm, "can we meet at the club tomorrow? There's something we need to discuss." "Sure," he said lightly. "Is it about the event next week?" "Yes," I replied. "Something like that." The next day he arrived wearing his usual confident grin. "So what's going on?" he asked. I handed him the documents. "You want to explain these?" His smile faded. "What's this supposed to be?" "You tell me," I said quietly. They're payments traced to your company, for services we never ordered. He hesitated. Look, maybe it's a misunderstanding. My assistant might have... Michael, I interrupted gently. Don't lie. He looked away. You've got plenty of money, Alice, he said finally, his voice lower now. You wouldn't even notice a few thousand here or there. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because of the money, but because it revealed exactly how he saw me. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just said, I notice everything. He sighed, trying to recover. Okay, maybe I crossed a line. But come on, it's family. You're not really going to make this a big deal, right? Family, I repeated quietly. That's what I thought we were too, when you all laughed at me for years. When you told people I couldn't afford to eat at this place. He looked uncomfortable. That was different. No, I said. It wasn't. It was about respect. And now, again, it's about respect. Mine and this business's. He didn't have a response. I stood up, calm as ever. You'll return every cent, I said. And you'll sign a formal apology for our records. If you do that, I won't press charges. He stared at me. You'd actually press charges against your own brother? I looked him straight in the eyes. If it protects my employees and this business, yes. There was a long silence. Then slowly he nodded. 2 days later, the money was back in our accounts, and the apology letter was signed. It wasn't heartfelt, I could tell, but it was done. That night, I sat alone on my office balcony, watching the city lights beyond the golf course. For years, I had imagined revenge as something fiery, dramatic, like in the stories we grow up hearing. But in real life, it's quieter. It's not about destroying people. It's about drawing boundaries that say, you can't hurt me anymore. In that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about payback. It was about restoration. It was about reclaiming peace after years of being denied it. After that confrontation, Michael distanced himself. He moved to another state, started his own small business, and from what I heard, struggled to make it work. I didn't reach out, but I didn't wish him harm either. Caroline, on the other hand, was becoming strangely friendly. She began stopping by the club often, pretending to check in on me. Sometimes she brought her friends, showing off that her sister owned the place. I didn't mind, but I could sense something behind it. That same envy she had always carried, just hidden under a new form of flattery. One afternoon, she asked if she could host her anniversary party at the club. It'll be good for business, she said sweetly. Lots of my friends are members here now. I smiled. Of course. We'll make sure it's perfect. She grinned, relieved. You're the best, Alice. I knew you'd say yes, and I did. Because I had learned something my grandmother always hinted at. Revenge isn't about denying people what they want. Sometimes it's about giving it to them, just in a way that reveals who they really are. So I let her plan her grand party. She requested the ballroom, custom catering, and special decor. She wanted everything high class. My staff and I made sure everything was handled professionally. The night of the event, the ballroom shimmered under golden light. Guests arrived in designer clothes, the music played softly, and laughter filled the air. Caroline floated through the room like she was the queen of the night. She didn't know that I had seen the invoices she had tried to shift onto the club's expense account. She had labeled them as marketing, expenses, expecting that no one would notice. But I had quietly arranged for those payments to be redirected back to her personal account, along with a detailed invoice labeled, Private Event, Full Payment Required. At the end of the evening, as the last guests began to leave, she came to me, smiling. Alice, it was perfect. Everyone loved it. Thank you so much. I'm glad, I said. Oh, by the way, the accounting office sent the final invoice to your assistant earlier. You'll get it in the morning. Her smile faltered. Invoice. I thought we agreed. We didn't agree to anything, Caroline, I said softly. You requested a private event, and private events are always billed. I gave you the family discount, of course, 10%. She stared at me. You're unbelievable. I shrugged gently. Just professional. She turned away, flustered, muttering something under her breath, I watched her leave, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. That night, I sat alone in the empty ballroom after everyone had gone. The lights reflected softly off the windows, and the faint smell of roses lingered in the air. It wasn't joy I felt. It was something else, something quieter and deeper. Justice, maybe. Balance. For the first time, I realized my revenge was no longer about them. It was about me, about learning that the best power is self-control, that you can face the people who once belittled you and not feel the need to shout, or prove, or punish. You just live well, calmly, on your own terms. But I didn't know then that life would test that peace again, harder than before, because within a few months, a storm was coming, one that would force me to decide whether forgiveness was stronger than revenge, or if some wounds never really heal. I didn't sleep that night, not out of anger, but out of a strange, quiet clarity that often comes when you've stopped pretending. I sat in my small apartment, lights dim, staring at the half-open laptop in front of me. The country club's name glowed on the screen. Willow Pines Country Club. It was my family's pride. The place they used to talk about like it was heaven on earth, and the same place where, years ago, my cousin Olivia had stood at the entrance and told me, "You don't belong here." I remembered her smirk as she said it, her hand resting casually on her designer handbag, while I, in my second-hand dress, had felt smaller than I'd ever been. That humiliation had burned a mark somewhere deep inside me, but I had learned to carry that mark quietly, the same way you carry a scar that no one else needs to see. Now, years later, the same club appeared on my laptop screen for a different reason. I had found out that the previous owner, Mr. Donovan, was selling. The club had gone through financial struggles for years, expensive maintenance, declining memberships, mismanagement. I had heard rumors before, but now the for sale listing confirmed it. It was official. The price tag was steep, several $1,000,000. I didn't have that kind of money sitting around, of course, but I did have something my family never thought I'd have: credibility, investors, and a reputation in the hospitality sector. Over the last few years, my work in event management and partnerships had quietly grown into a solid business. I had a network, savings, and, more importantly, the discipline to make things happen. Still, buying the very place where I'd once been humiliated felt almost surreal. I didn't rush it. I spent weeks analyzing the deal, reading every document I could find, hiring a small legal team to guide me through the process. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming something. It was about turning pain into purpose. Every time I looked at the club's old photos online, the manicured lawns, the chandeliers, the poolside where my family had once taken pictures I wasn't invited to be part of, I felt the same quiet determination. I wanted to own it, yes, but not to throw it in their faces. I wanted to rebuild it into something better, something they would never have had the heart to create. The negotiations started slowly. Mr. Donovan was in his 60s, polite but tired. His voice carried that tone of a man who'd seen better days in business. "You're younger than most people I deal with," he said when we first met in person. "I get that a lot," I replied, smiling softly. He looked at me curiously. "You sound serious. Most people your age want to make a quick buck, not run a club like this." "I don't want to flip it," I told him. "I want to restore it, and I know exactly what's wrong with it." We talked for hours. I told him about my background, my ideas to modernize membership models, to make the club more inclusive, to host community events. He seemed genuinely impressed. When I left that meeting, the autumn air felt different. Cold, but full of possibility. It took another 2 months of paperwork, loans, and investor meetings. I wasn't alone. A quiet circle of colleagues believed in me and my vision. My lawyer Maya became my biggest ally. "Alice," she said during one of our calls, "you realize the poetic justice in this, right?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm not doing it for that." She laughed softly. "Sure, but when it happens, it's going to be one for the books." When the sale finally closed, I sat in my car outside the club's iron gates and just breathed. The sign still read, Willow Pines Country Club. The same sign that had once looked so unreachable now stood under my name on the papers folded neatly in my lap. I felt no triumph, no shouting joy, just a deep, steady peace. A few days later, I quietly began the transformation. The club had good bones, but it needed care. Updated interiors, new management, new spirit. I hired a team, renovated the lounge, and began rebranding it under a new name, the Pines Estate. A place not for exclusion, but for connection. I wanted it to be elegant yet open, luxurious yet warm. When the grand reopening was finally announced, invitations went out to members, both old and new. The news spread quickly through the small social circles in town, and of course, through my family. I didn't send them a personal invitation, but I knew how fast gossip travels. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I didn't dread seeing their faces. I had no intention to embarrass anyone. I just wanted to exist, freely, confidently, in the same space where I was once told I didn't belong. The day of the reopening came like a quiet sunrise. I arrived early, walking through the polished halls, touching the new marble counter, the freshly polished wood. Staff greeted me warmly, unaware of the deeper story behind my calm smile. Everything was perfect. By noon, guests began to arrive. I stayed mostly behind the scenes, letting the event manager handle the introductions. I didn't need attention, but then, as expected, I saw them, my family. My Aunt Ruth, her husband, my cousins Olivia and Grace, all dressed like they were attending a royal event. Olivia's laugh rang across the room, sharp and confident as ever. I stood near the back, watching quietly. When our eyes met, she froze for a second, then smirked. That same smirk from years ago. I could almost hear her thoughts. What is she doing here? They approached the reception desk, chatting loudly, not realizing the staff there were my employees now. "We're here for the reopening," Aunt Ruth said. "Family name, Wilson," the receptionist nodded politely. "Welcome, Ms. Wilson. Enjoy the event." I stayed calm, sipping my coffee, blending in among the guests. For a few moments it felt like nothing had changed, but I knew the truth was simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment. Later that evening, a formal dinner was held in the ballroom. I made sure everything was in perfect order, soft jazz, candlelight, and an atmosphere that felt both classy and intimate. I sat at a reserved table with my manager and 2 investors, listening to the hum of conversations around the room. And then, just as I expected, Olivia spotted me again. She tilted her head slightly, confusion written all over her face. She walked up holding her glass of wine and said, "Wow, Alice, I didn't expect to see you here. Did someone invite you?" I looked up at her and smiled softly. "You could say that," she chuckled, glancing around. "This is the VIP area, you know. It's not open for everyone." I nodded slowly. "I'm aware." Then she looked over her shoulder and waved toward one of the guards standing nearby. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "Could you please escort her out? I don't think she's supposed to be here." The guard hesitated, looking confused. He glanced at me, then back at her. "Ma'am," he said politely, "I believe she's allowed here." Olivia frowned. "No, she's not. She's making a scene." And that's when I decided to stand, calmly, gracefully. I placed my napkin on the table, turned toward the guard, and said with the same quiet tone I had used in every business meeting that got me here, "It's all right." "She doesn't know yet." The guard gave a small, almost amused smile. "Ma'am," he said to Olivia, "she's the owner. Ms. Alice Carter. She owns this place." The room went still. The music didn't stop, but every sound seemed to blur. Olivia's face froze mid-expression, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. Aunt Ruth's fork clinked softly against her plate. I didn't say another word. I just smiled, nodded politely to the guard, and walked away toward the balcony overlooking the gardens. The cool air hit my face, and I let out a long breath. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge in the loud, fiery way people imagine. It was something much quieter, like balance being restored after a long storm. And in that quiet, I knew something else. My story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me finally standing in the place I'd once been pushed away from, and realizing I no longer needed their validation. Olivia stood frozen for a long moment, the kind of silence that makes people turn and stare. You could almost hear the air shift in the room. Her confident posture wilted ever so slightly as she blinked, trying to process what the guard had just said. I didn't need to see her reaction fully to know the chaos happening inside her head. Aunt Ruth recovered first. She forced a laugh, the kind of brittle, artificial laugh people use when they're embarrassed in public. "Oh, come on," she said, waving her hand dismissively. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. But the guard didn't waver. "No, ma'am," he said firmly. "Ms. Alice Carter purchased the club earlier this year. She's the new owner of the Pines estate." The table next to them had gone quiet, whispers already passing between guests. I watched from a few steps away, my expression calm but unreadable. Olivia's face flushed red, and I saw her grip her wineglass a little too tightly. Her mother looked between us, searching for some kind of explanation that would make this all less humiliating. I didn't give them one. I didn't owe them that. Instead, I offered a small, polite smile and said, "I hope you're all enjoying the evening. Please stay as long as you like. The dinner's on the house." Then I turned and walked away. The truth is, I could have easily rubbed it in, could have delivered a cutting line or a self-satisfied speech. But that wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be anymore. My calmness was my loudest statement. As I moved through the room, a few guests glanced at me with subtle admiration. Some of them knew the family dynamics. The small-town whispers had been around for years. A few even smiled at me knowingly, but I didn't stop to bask in it. I went out to the balcony again, letting the cold night air cool the faint rush of adrenaline that still pulsed in my chest. I could hear laughter and music from inside again after a few minutes. Life resumed, as it always does, even after moments of quiet revelation. Later, as the event drew to a close, I noticed my family sitting stiffly at their table, eating in silence. Olivia wasn't laughing anymore. Her posture had changed, guarded, smaller. Every so often she'd glance toward me, but I never looked back for long. When the evening finally ended, they left quickly, avoiding any goodbyes. When they were gone, I walked through the club one last time that night. The candles had burned low. Staff were clearing tables. Soft music hummed through the speakers. I stopped in the middle of the ballroom, the same space where years ago I wasn't even allowed to enter. For a long time, I just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of lights and footsteps, feeling that deep, slow satisfaction that doesn't come from winning, but from healing. That night, I drove home under the pale glow of streetlights. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, from friends, from old acquaintances, even from a few relatives who suddenly wanted to reconnect. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. I needed time to absorb everything. When I got home, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. My reflection in the glass looked calm, older than my 28 years, but peaceful. Owning the country club didn't fix all the past wounds, but it gave me something rare: closure. The kind of closure you don't get by shouting, but by standing your ground in silence. A week passed before I heard from my aunt. She called one afternoon, her voice careful, almost too polite. "Alice, dear," she said, "I just wanted to say we're all so proud of how far you've come. Truly." I could hear the discomfort behind her words, pride laced with guilt. I didn't make it easier for her. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "That means a lot." Then came the part I expected. "We were wondering," she continued, "if you might want to have a family lunch sometime soon. You know, to reconnect. We've all missed you." I smiled to myself. It was such a predictable move. For years I had been invisible, the one no one invited, the one they laughed about quietly. But now that I owned something valuable, I was suddenly family again. "I'll think about it," I said softly. And that was the truth. I really did think about it. For days, I wrestled with the question of forgiveness. Should I sit with them again? Listen to their half-hearted apologies? Pretend the years of silence didn't exist? Or should I simply let go? Walk my own path without bitterness, but without reconciliation? I decided on something in between. 2 weeks later, I organized a charity gala at the Pines Estate, a fundraiser for underprivileged youth programs. I invited city officials, business owners, and yes, my family. If they wanted to reconnect, this was the setting to do it. A public one. A place where my dignity wasn't at stake anymore. They arrived late, as always. My aunt looked overly dressed, Olivia in her usual designer flair. But this time, they didn't walk in like they owned the place. They walked in like guests, and that small shift said everything. When I greeted them, I noticed how differently they looked at me now. Not with condescension, but with caution. Aunt Ruth tried to start small talk. "You've done such amazing things here, Alice. This place looks incredible." "Thank you," I said gently. "It's been a long road, but I'm happy with where it's headed." Olivia stayed quiet for most of the night, her usual confidence muted. She avoided eye contact, which told me more than any apology ever could. During the event, I gave a short speech. Nothing dramatic, just a heartfelt message about opportunity and resilience. I spoke about how every person deserves a place to belong, and how success isn't about proving others wrong, but about proving yourself right. As I spoke, I noticed a few people turning to look at my family. They knew the story. The years of rejection, the cruel whispers. But I didn't mention names or point fingers. I didn't need to. The message was clear. After the speech, I went backstage for a moment alone. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the quiet power of letting go. Maya, my lawyer and now close friend, joined me there. "You did it," she said softly. I smiled. I guess I did. "You got your revenge." I shook my head gently. "Not revenge, peace," she nodded. "Peace suits you better." When I stepped back out, the applause was still echoing. My aunt approached me, her eyes glistening slightly. "That was beautiful, Alice," she said. "We're really proud." For the first time, I believed she might actually mean it, or at least part of it. Still, I didn't respond with warmth. I just smiled politely, then turned my attention to the guests waiting to speak to me. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the club's gates, looking at the glowing sign, "The Pines Estate." I whispered softly to myself, "You did it, Alice." Not for them. Not even to erase the past, but for the version of me that once stood outside those gates, too afraid to walk in. As weeks turned into months, the club thrived. Memberships grew, events flourished, and the community embraced the space. My family remained in occasional contact, polite, distant, unsure of how to exist in my new world. And that was fine with me. Sometimes late at night, I'd walk through the empty hallways of the estate, hearing echoes of the past in the quiet corners. My cousin's cruel laughter, my aunt's dismissive tone, my own younger voice doubting itself. But those echoes didn't hurt anymore. They reminded me of how far I'd come. True revenge, I realized, isn't about making someone else feel small. It's about growing so much that their opinion no longer matters. And as for Olivia, she eventually reached out too. A short message one evening. "Hey Alice, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I was young and stupid. I shouldn't have treated you that way." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I know. We were both younger then. I hope you're doing well." That was it. No grudge, no gloating, just peace. Because in the end, the calmest kind of revenge is simply becoming the person they thought you'd never be, and still having the grace to forgive them for not believing in you. Months passed, and life settled into something I had never experienced before. Quiet stability. The kind that doesn't feel like a reward, but like a breath after years of holding it in. The Pines Estate had become more than a business for me. It was a reflection of everything I had built from scratch. Resilience, vision, and a certain calm defiance that didn't need to shout to be heard. Every morning, I arrived early, long before the staff or guests. The air was always crisp then, the dew still on the grass, and the sun just beginning to warm the lake. I'd walk through the gardens in silence, coffee cup in hand, thinking about how strange life can be. Sometimes I'd stop under the willow trees, the same ones that once framed my family's group photos, the ones I was never asked to join. I used to hate those trees, but now I loved their quiet, graceful way of standing. They didn't ask for attention. They just grew, strong, patient, still. I like to think I'd become something like that too. My team adored working here. Many of them had started when the club was falling apart, and now, under new leadership, they took pride in it again. We added art exhibits, youth scholarship galas, and open community weekends. The old whispers that the Pines was only for the wealthy began to fade. People from all backgrounds started walking through those doors, smiling, comfortable. That meant more to me than any profit. But still, sometimes at night, I'd think about my family. I didn't miss them in the way I used to. The ache was gone, replaced with a softer curiosity, wondering if they ever truly understood what their words had done to me back then. One Sunday morning, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real handwritten letter in a pale blue envelope. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Olivia's. I hesitated before opening it. I didn't know what to expect. Guilt, apology, manipulation. It could have been any of those, but when I finally unfolded the paper, the words were honest. She wrote that she'd been going through her own struggles, that after the night at the club, she had started seeing herself differently. She admitted that her cruelty toward me wasn't really about me. It was about her own insecurity, about the constant pressure in our family to be the best, the prettiest, the most successful. She said seeing me succeed, quietly, without the family's help, forced her to face things she'd ignored for years. It wasn't a long letter, but it felt real. At the bottom, she'd written, "You didn't just prove me wrong. You showed me what grace really looks like. Thank you." I sat there for a long time, just staring at the page. For years, I'd imagined what an apology might sound like. This wasn't dramatic or grand, it was simple, human. And that made it powerful. I didn't reply right away. I needed to feel it, to process it. That night, I went back to the club and stood alone in the ballroom. The lights were dim. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden, and I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. I closed my eyes and thought about every version of myself that had walked through those doors. The young girl turned away, the woman signing ownership papers, the calm host greeting guests with quiet pride. They were all me, just in different stages of becoming. For a moment, I felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude. For the pain even, because without it, I would never have built the strength that carried me here. I decided to write Olivia back, not with anger or distance, but with understanding. I told her I appreciated her honesty, that I had long since moved past resentment. I even invited her to visit the club sometime, not as family, but as a guest. Someone welcome, if she chose to walk in peace. A few weeks later, she did. It was a mild afternoon in spring. The gardens were in full bloom, and the light had that golden warmth that makes everything feel softer. I was sitting on the patio, reviewing some design proposals when I saw her walking up the path. She looked nervous, almost fragile in a way I'd never seen before. I stood up, smiling. "You made it." She nodded. "I almost didn't." "I'm glad you did." We sat together under the same canopy where I used to serve drinks as a part-time waitress years ago. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. For a while, we just talked about normal things: work, family, the city. There was no mention of the past. Eventually, she sighed and said, "I was horrible to you, Alice. I don't even know what I was trying to prove." I looked at her, calm and steady. "You don't need to explain. We were both different people back then." She shook her head. "No, you were always the better person. You just didn't have the chance to show it." That conversation lasted almost 2 hours, and when she left, I didn't feel like I'd gotten revenge. I felt like I'd closed a very long, very painful chapter. Later that evening, I walked through the club again. The lights from the ballroom spilled gently into the hallway. Music drifted from a distant speaker, and laughter echoed faintly from the lounge. Life was happening, And I was part of it, not as an outsider, but as its calm center. I stopped by the front desk where the old family portrait used to hang. During the renovations, I'd taken it down. Now, in its place, hung a new photograph. One of the staff together, smiling after the reopening gala. That to me was family now. People who built something together with kindness and mutual respect. I often think about how revenge stories are told. All fire, confrontation, dramatic speeches. But in real life, revenge rarely looks like that. It's quieter. It's walking into the same place they once threw you out of. Not to gloat, but to lead. It's building a life so steady and self-sufficient that the very people who underestimated you have no choice but to respect you. Some weeks later, the club hosted a private family reunion for the first time. Not mine, another family's. But watching them laugh and eat together reminded me of something I once longed for. And strangely, I didn't feel bitter. I just smiled, realizing I had finally stopped needing things to look the way they once did. Because in the end, family doesn't have to be blood. It can be built from loyalty, compassion, and the people who choose to stand beside you when no one else does. That night, as the last guests left, I stayed behind a little longer. I turned off the lights one by one, walking through each room, the lounge, the ballroom, the patio. Every corner had a memory attached to it, but none of them hurt anymore. They felt like markers of growth. Before leaving, I stepped outside and looked up at the sign glowing softly in the night. The Pines Estate, a place for everyone. And it hit me. That was the real victory. Not owning a fancy club, not proving anything to my family, but creating a space that reflected who I had become, someone who turned rejection into purpose. When I finally locked up and got into my car, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the girl who'd once been laughed out of a dinner or mocked for being not good enough. I saw a woman who had walked through humiliation, loneliness and doubt, and come out calm, steady, and unshakable. I smiled quietly to myself. "You did it," I whispered again, just like that night months ago. But this time it wasn't just about me. It was about the lesson, that real revenge doesn't destroy, it transforms. It turns pain into patience. It turns rejection into resilience. It turns silence into power. And sometimes, it even turns enemies into people who finally understand what kindness really looks like. As I drove away, the city lights shimmered like soft embers in the distance. The night was calm, and for the first time in my life, so was I. Because peace, real peace, is the quietest revenge there is. So if you're listening to this story, and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or made to feel like you don't belong, remember this: you don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to fight to win. Sometimes, all you need to do is grow, patiently, quietly, beautifully, until one day, you walk into the very place you were once pushed out of, and realize you no longer need anyone's permission to stay. This was my story. How the family who once called security on me ended up standing in the club I owned. Not because I wanted to show them off, but because I wanted to show myself what grace really means. And if my story spoke to you, even a little, I'd love for you to stay connected. Like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge for more stories where quiet strength wins over noise. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the calmest hearts carry the strongest fire.